My name is Michael Rank, and I'm an associate professor for the USC School of Social Work.
Okay, so what was your life like before Vietnam?
I was in a small state school in upstate Pennsylvania. And actually, this is the late 60s, and the times were kind of crazy, politically, as well as individuals protesting against the war, people supporting the war. And it was difficult to really discern what the reality was. I was majoring in accounting, and actually I was a senior, had a semester left to go to graduate, and I was really frustrated with thinking about myself as an accountant for the rest of my life, and I was really fascinated, not fascinated, but interested in Vietnam, and I did the craziest thing. I dropped out of school, withdrew from school, and I volunteered for the draft.
His opinion about you doing that?
My father just, didn't like it at all. Actually, my father was a World War II veteran. He was airborne. He jumped on D-Day, and interestingly enough, he became anti-war, anti-guns later on in his life. But I never really discussed with him the fact that I was going to join the Army or volunteer for the draft. Once he found out that I did that, he was disturbed, to say the least. But ultimately supported my decision. I mean, there's nothing else he could do, because once I signed up, that was it, and couldn't take back the signature. So he was disturbed, but supported me. My mother was really distraught, I mean, she cried for hours, for days actually, before I left.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I have one sister who's 5 years younger, and she was disturbed as well. Actually, I had a number of friends that had gone to Vietnam before me, and a set of twins. And at that time, only one of the twins could go to Vietnam or could go into combat, and the other had to stay home stateside. So I knew both of these guys, and the one was a Marine, and he stepped on a landmine and lost his leg. And 2 weeks before I was to go into 2 weeks before I was to go into the Army, he showed up at my house with his brother, kind of like as wishing me well and going into the Army. And it really disturbed my mother, because he was, hobbling around, and he was on painkillers, and it was really just an awful sight. And it broke my heart to see him that way, and also the twins, who I knew so very well while I was going through college. So that was my send-off.
Polarizing views. So what was it like being directly in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I had a lot of comments like, you're a college boy. What are you doing here? Why are you here? Why did you make this choice? You don't have to do this. Why did you do it? And I did a lot of backpedaling and justifying. And after a while, I was scratching my head, wondering why I did it as well. I mean, I've come to understand it, subsequently. But a lot of individuals, once they knew what my background was, I mean, I had 3.5 years of college. I had a semester left to graduate, and people are saying, "Are you crazy? Why? What are you doing here?" And but it never. I mean, I never really felt bad about the decision. I never said I should have never done that, and even to this day, it's the best decision I ever made, because it really, and we'll get to this later, but it really defined my career and the trajectory of my career. It was a hallmark experience, which is unlike anything else that I've ever experienced in my life.
When were you in Vietnam? How old were you, and what, you kind of already touched upon this, but what was your personality and beliefs and values at the time?
Yeah, I was in Vietnam during 1970, so it was the post-Tet offensive, and also Nixon at that time had talked about drawing down the troops. So at 1970 is really the pivotal point where we're starting to bring massive amounts of troops home during that time, and we were de-escalating the war. So there wasn't as much action as there had been previous to that, because up until the Tet, it seems like Vietnam is defined by the Tet Offensive. You know, and everything up until the Tet really escalated, and then since then it just kind of de-escalated. And I think that you know, it's, well, for whatever reasons, the United States wanted to be out, politically we wanted to be out as well, and there was no more support at home. I mean, the individuals, families, and the population in the United States just were fed up with it. Because it got nowhere, it was getting nowhere, and no one could really give a good, solid reason for why all of these individuals were dying and why we continue to be there. I was there, spent time at it's called LZ Professional, which was by the Laotian border, and it was just south of the DMZ. I was in Chu Lai. I was with the 196th Infantry with the Americal Division, and which is in Chu Lai, which is right along the eastern seaboard, by the south, next to the South China Sea, and it was south of Da Nang, south of the DMZ, and actually had a kind of dubious distinction, because the 196th Infantry and the Americal Division is where the massacre had occurred at My Lai. And I was in the same company as the individuals, you know, Colonel Calley, Lieutenant Calley, who had been adjudicated and court-martialed as a result of the My Lai massacre. Well, I came on the heels of that, and I went into the same company that had committed those atrocities. So
about the culture while you were there?
I knew nothing about Vietnam before I went there. I knew we were at war in Vietnam, and I knew geographically where it was located, and I knew, you know, the politics, the contentious politics of, you know, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and I knew a little bit about that because I'd done that research that I wrote for the paper, and also you read what you read from the newspaper as well as the nightly news and things of that nature. But I really I had no idea what it was like to be there. And I was caught by how beautiful the country is. You know, I can remember walking through mountains and valleys where you'd see no evidence of human beings at all. I mean, it was just beautiful mountains and valleys and streams and wildlife. You know, it's like you'd encounter a wild boar, and actually there were tigers. I never encountered that. One of my friends actually encountered a tiger. So it was truly where I was. Now, I wasn't in the south, I was in the north, and it was very much jungle. I picked the infantry.
Oh, okay.
The infantry picked me.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
I should say the DOD picked me to be in the infantry.
Okay.
And so infantry training is for the most part learning how to fire weapons. I mean, your job as an infantryman is a ground pounder, a grunt, you know, a basic. It's cannon fodder, what many people call it. I mean, you're the first line of defense. Now, there's different weapons that you could choose. There's one, I served with this one guy who was a really good friend of mine. He was from Hawaii. We called him Pineapple. And he carried an M60. And there's grenade launchers and machine guns and various other kind of light weapons infantry. So I was trained in light weapons infantry, but for the most part what I carried was an M16. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, what you the training, and I trained in Fort Jackson, Fort Jackson, which is in Columbia, South Carolina. And there's nothing that they could have done to prepare us for as I look at it in retrospect. Sure, you learn how to fire a rifle. You learn how to low crawl. You know, you learn how to endure certain kind of things. But there's no way that you can simulate real combat in the jungle Now that's completely different because you never know where the enemy is. I tell you this, the training, and this kind of coincides with what you asked before, the way that I was trained. One of the pictures that I gave you shows me standing on a log, and it says VC log. Now that VC log was placed at the end of a sandy kind of pit that is about, I'd say, 50 to 60 feet long. What we had to do, and by the way, that sandy pit, there was urine, feces, all kinds of stuff that ran through that. And also was a runoff from not only from some of the latrines in the area, but from the kitchen. Our training was to low crawl through that with a knife in our mouth, right? And so we're low crawling through it, and that's probably where I got the cellulitis, from an infection from that stuff. But once you got to the end of that, like 50 or 60 foot track, we were supposed to take our bayonet out of our mouth, which we carried in our mouth, and stab the VC log in a violent frenzy. And the idea was, of course, is that we're transferring all our angst and anger, from having to low crawl and all this sewage and everything, to stabbing and transfer that anger onto the VC log. But we got it. We understood what they were doing. And so we understood that what they're trying to do is get us angry at the Viet Cong. We were really angry at them for making us do it. So, psychology didn't work as far as that concerned. Anyway, that was kind of some of my training. That was probably more hands-on training, the most hands-on training I got in terms of being in combat.
How did you feel about your position and
Hated it.
doing those actions?
Hated it. Absolutely hated it. Made me sick to my stomach to see what it was that we were doing. That was in my squad. We called him Doc. He was a conscientious objector. But nevertheless, he carried a .45. So he walks up to the guy's body, and this is kind of graphic, but this tale needs to be told. He opens up his mouth, and he sees that he has gold teeth. So he starts stomping on the guy's body, his face, trying to dislodge the teeth. And after a while, he would reach in there, he'd wiggle the teeth, he couldn't get it out. So he took his surgical scissors, and I'll never forget this sound. It was like the sound of a scissors cutting through a carrot. And he literally cut the gold teeth out of the guy's mouth and put them in his pocket. And I was in absolute disbelief. This is defacing, defiling a body. And I thought, wow, the enemy does this. We don't do this. But here I'm witnessing this firsthand, and I'm looking around. And of course, one thing that you learn is you keep your mouth shut. At the end of 1970, the beginning of 1971, and I didn't waste any time. I was home 3 days, and I went straight back to my college. And I said, look, I want to get back in. And they embraced me with open arms. As a matter of fact, it was probably the best experience that I had, and I was really received very well by the department. That I changed my major. I went from accounting to sociology. So my time in Vietnam really changed me as far as that was concerned. I was struggling what to study, but sociology just seemed like so rich to me. And I thought about that during the time. And I always knew that I was going to go back and finish my degree. It's just I didn't want to do it in accounting. So when I came back, the world was the United States was contentious, but it seemed like the whole world had changed in the 2 years that I was gone. A different world perspective on man's inhumanity to man, and the terrorism of war. Actually, it's unlike anything that anybody could. You could read books. You could read great books about it. And I know there's a couple of really good books about war that's on killing and on combat, and it really nails kind of like the existential experience of being in war. And keep in mind that there's a philosophical piece, there's an existential piece, there's a spiritual piece. Because when you start engaging in life and death, you start questioning your beliefs, and you start questioning the way that people live life, and how easy it is to take a life, and which is just horrendous when you think about just how easy it is to take a life. But why is it that we need to take lives in order to propagate political ends? And I think that that's what I came out of it with, was more of a distaste for politics and for the misuse of young individuals to fight wars for reasons that we really weren't clear about, and still aren't clear about today.
Mm-hmm.